Good day, everyone. Permit me to share with you my paper titled What Makes Contextualized Teaching Models Possible? Insight and Erfahrung. This paper has been published in the journal Philosophia, the National Journal of Philosophy, which is a Scopus Index journal in the October 2025 issue. Now, um, let me begin with the puzzle. Some of my students are surprised when they hear about how there is a Tagay teaching model, okay, or the kumbira model of joyful teaching, or the lantugi model of agonist teaching. So here, for example, we find Capin et al. Publishing the work on the kumbira model of joyful teaching. Kumbira is simply the practice in Central Philippines where we celebrate the fiesta, for example. We celebrate birthdays with food. It's a social occasion, and the essence identified by Capin et al. In the practice is joy, and therefore you can use joy as a bridge to develop a teaching model out of kumbira. Or another example is this paper by Inocian and Lozano, which first explicated the process of developing or making the gitara, and then out of the stages that they discovered, they then developed the gitara teaching model, which is parallel to the process of making the gitara. Or in my article and in my book, recent book, where I developed the idea that lantugi, the debate, the religious debate in the plaza, actually essentially is agonist democracy, diba? Which is the political theory of Chantal Mouffe, which states that in a democracy, we can never realistically arrive at consensus. We must accept how politics, discussions like this will always be passionate, and there will always be conflict. What has to be maintained is the hegemony of democracy, Chantal Mouffe states, which avoids violence and preserves the safe space for discourse. And I saw how Lantugi has that in essence, agonist democracy, and then that's the basis, that's the middle term out of which I developed the Lantugi model of agonist teaching. So my question now is, what makes the development of these teaching models, these contextualized teaching models, possible? And if you are aware with the philosophers in the phenomenological tradition, this is basically asking the question, what intellectual movements, what structures are there in us, that makes possible the experience, the reality that there are these contextualized teaching models that have already been developed. So the research questions are simply, number one, what steps do teacher researchers make when they develop a culture-based teaching model? Because these steps are the windows into the structures of cognition that are embedded in that process of developing the teaching model. Next, letter B, what intellectual act makes or allows a teacher to see a universal must in the local practice? And then C, how can that act be tested so the resulting teaching model remains faithful and not appropriative? So how do you make sure that the teaching model that is being developed does not bastardize the practice? No? So many studies have been written related to this paper, but we cannot discuss all of that in detail. The method is basically philosophical, because if you notice, this article is published in Philosophia, right? It's a theoretical, methodological analysis, reflection on a previous empirical work, which is phenomenological in design, where I interviewed Lantugi culture bearers, debaters in Bohol. Lantugi here being the example of a cultural practice, out of which I developed the Lantugi model of agonist teaching. So, results. Let me just run through. First, what does the teacher innovator do, the contextualizer do? First, the teacher immerses in the cultural practice that she finds, or he or she finds, interesting. This can be done, for example, through ethnography or phenomenology. Afterwards, B, or number two, you do imaginative variation. This is the language used by Scott Churchill to refer to how you um, try to remove some parts of that experience and then see if what remains when you remove all accidental aspects of the experience. That is how you identify the essence, the eidos of that experience. That's imaginative variation. And then you do the inventive leap, wherein, for example, you identify that the essence of kumbira is joy. Then the inventive leap is when you develop the teaching model, the kumbira model of joyful teaching. Then you do hermeneutic validation. You present that teaching model again to the community and let them evaluate if the teaching model is good. Is it true to the cultural practice? Now, what makes all of that possible? In trying to ask that question, I went back to my readings in philosophy, and I encountered two concepts from two major thinkers. One of them is Bernard Lonergan, who wrote about the concept of insight. Insight in his book, Insight, titled Insight and Inquiry into Human Understanding, simply refers to how when at the first time when we encountered a set of, for example, oranges, at first you only see the concrete particulars, oranges, but then eventually you identify the essence of the orange, such that you know what orangeness actually is, and what characteristics an orange must have in every future version of an orange that you will encounter. Right? That's insight. And that's the process wherein you identify, for example, joy in kumbira, catharsis in tagay, no? Agonist democracy in lantugi. Okay? So that process requires what I identified or what I found to be already be articulated by Lonergan, the concept called insight. Now, the next question now is, what makes sure that the teaching model does not bastardize the practice? No? So the answer is, I found to be in Hans-Georg Gadamer's concept of Erfahrung. It is a disorienting horizon altering encounter, which means it's an experience that really changes you. So you have only allowed, no, you have only authentically created a teaching model if the teaching model is really a result of you being affected by your encounter with that cultural practice. No, there has to be a change, a disorientation in you, such that when you immersed in that experience, in the cultural practice, everything you do, including teaching, is no longer the same. Okay, so that's Erfahrung. No? So I think I don't have time anymore. So all of that I articulated into one concept. We call it creative isomorphic alignment, which refers to, yes, it's creative because there's an inventive step, but it's isomorphic because the essence of the cultural practice has to be congruent with the structure of the teaching model. And this alignment, of course, they have to match each other. Okay? So let me conclude how, yes, on the one hand, I discovered in this paper that we need insight. We also need Erfahrung. But Dr. Romel Coraming has argued that what needs further development in this research, for example, when we try to decolonize something, like decolonizing pedagogy like this, in this way, we have to look at the embeddedness of that knowledge production in power, no? And this insight is drawn by Coraming on Michel Foucault. So future research should do that. So a few recommendations. Number one, pre-service teacher education should trigger this capacity for insight. No? So we must move away from the banking model in teacher education. Furthermore, in teaching anything, especially in social studies and social science, the aim is to make the familiar, kumbira, strange. And to make the strange, like agonism, familiar, so lantugi, right? Then, another recommendation is to continue the iteration and development and validation of culture-based teaching models. See, much work still can be done in this area. And finally, to follow the insight of Kuraming about knowledge and power, we must always foreground the culture bearers. They must be those whom are given recognition when you develop this type of research. These are my references. To conclude, teaching is at once interpretive, ethical, and political. It requires the eye to discern universals in concrete practice and the humility to be altered by what one discerns. That double, even triple capacity, insight coupled with Erfahrung, embedded in structures of power, marks teaching as a distinctively human art in an age of increasingly capable, yet ahistorical machines. That concludes the brief presentation of my paper. Thank you so much.